Hi, welcome to Module 1 of DBXL's I messed that up already. Welcome to day 1 of Qdabra's DBXL training. My name is Ernesto Machado. In this first module, we're going to focus our attention on the classic scenario that has been the main scenario for DBXL for customers using DBXL 2.7 or earlier. What we call this scenario is the integrated scenario. In this scenario, we discussed earlier in our slides here, DBXL is sort of the central repository of the data. The info path forms submit to DBXL, and then DBXL in turn maps its data to SharePoint and to SQL. So that's the scenario in a nutshell. What we're going to do is we're going to jump right in and we're going to illustrate this module through an example, this scenario through an example. I won't be showing the PDF on the screen that you are seeing, but you can follow along with the PDF on your screen. As I mentioned, the key in this scenario is that the form has to submit to DBXL. So we have to make sure there's a data connection that submits to DBXL, and this form that we are using is the expense report sample that's been around. It was designed by InfoPath, by Microsoft, and it's been around since 2007. It comes with a email submit, but we're not going to use that, so I'll just get rid of it right off the bat. Now, before we start connecting to the DBXL web service, before we start creating a submit data connection and all of that, we need to take some preliminary steps. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check that you and I are all DBXL administrators. So I am connecting to the server where DBXL is installed through remote desktop connection, and I'm going to check in computer management the local groups. So when I install DBXL, and in general when you install DBXL, this group is created out of the box. It's called DBXL admins. And it looks like we have a lot of people added here. Looks like I am right here. And the training accounts are right here. Training 2014-0224. So you're part of this group. So let's say that you need to add somebody in the future, or remove somebody. Well, let's practice removing somebody. That's it. That person is no longer a DBXL admin here. And to add somebody, you just look them up here. And I'm trying to think of, I can add a group. Let's add a group. Here we go. So I'm adding a domain group here. So anyone who's a member of that domain group is now a DBXL administrator. So that's pretty straightforward. We just need to make sure that we are administrators, so that every step that we take in this module has the proper permissions. We're authorized. The other thing I like to do up front is, and this depends a lot on your local setup, but what I like to do up front is I would like to make sure that my site has been added to local intranet. I have a lot of sites added here, but here it is, training.formsboard.com. Okay. So the site does indeed belong to local intranet. If you experience any issues when opening the DBXL admin tool, typically one of the solutions is to add the site to local internet. So I like to do that up front just to avoid any issues. Now the last thing I would like to do here before I start modifying this form is I want to see what DBXL looks like. So I'm going to open the DBXL admin tool. I have already bookmarked it, but it's among those links in the training page. So this is what the DBXL admin tool looks like. It comes with one document type already configured, the expense report sample. We don't really need that, so long term, if you don't need it, you can always delete it. I'm getting this warning about expiring or expired license packs, and since you are going to be creating document types here, and I will be creating document types here, I'm going to add a license just to make sure that we're not in any sort of trouble later on. So when you try to attach a license, you're going to be asked for a .lic file, which we typically send to you. And every license is created for a specific email address, typically yours or your manager or somebody at your company. So we'll just add that license, and looks like my license doesn't match. The email I have entered doesn't match the license. Maybe it's because of that extra space. Nope. There we go. So I had an extra space there. So now that I have added the license, the purchased license, the retail license, that you'll see that the trial license goes away. And this license is much bigger, so during this training we can create 100 document types and 100 documents, and we won't run into an issue here. So now we can rest assured that we're all set up, right? We have a valid license. I don't know why I'm still getting this message. It's because it's a month and a half from expiring. We're a DBXL administrator. Our site is local internet, so it's going to be authorized. We're not going to get infinite credential prompts. So we can jump right into the form design itself. Now, up front, the minimum amount of work that we need to do to connect, to integrate this form into DBXL is to create a data connection that submits to DBXL. So we just go through the regular data connection wizard that InfoPath gives us. We want to submit to a web service, and that web service is, how do we know what that web service is? Let me show you. After you install DBXL, your browser is typically going to redirect you to this page. And we call this the default page. So how do you know which web service are you going to use? Well, the web services are right here. These are all the web services that are available. So you don't, let's avoid having to type excessively, so let's just copy the shortcut here. So there it is. There's my DBXL document service. This is the web service that you're going to use the most, simply because it's the web service that submits. And later on, we'll use it to query as well. So this is by far the web service that is going to get hit the most. So once we have that URL in there, DBXL will return a list of operations. These are all the operations that are available within DBXL document service. You may not have a need for a lot of these. But if they're here, it's because we've used them. and depending on the scenario, you might end up using some of these. The most basic submit data connection we can create uses submit document, so that's what we're going to use here. There are other options, such as submit document as user, which is right below it, which allows you to impersonate other users. We're not going to do that right now. We're just going to use submit document, which means that DBXL registers, who the person is signed in. The person who's signed in is the person who's submitting. So in this next screen, what we're shown is a series of parameters. The most important parameter here is the second one, the XML parameter. And whenever you get to this is all you have to do. You just have to submit the entire form as a string. That's pretty straightforward. So the other parameters are important in certain scenarios, or optional. So let me go through some of these. The doc type name is required if you are using something like the side-by-side scenario, if you're submitting to multiple forms. You're not submitting one form, you're submitting 2 or 3 forms at once. That typically involves submitting with code anyway, so sometimes we pass the doc type name through the code. What other scenario is doc type name needed? I think that's it. There's a series of 3 parameters here: name, author, and description. And none of these is required. They're all optional, but they're very useful. And the reason they're useful is, as the DBXL administrator, you might have to at some point identify documents. Maybe you need to delete a document, maybe you need to reshred a document, and I'll explain what that means later on. But you'll have a need to identify a document, and the name, author, and description are going to allow you to do that. What you can do here is you can just pick fields from your schema. So I'll just pick the expense code as the name, and for all of these I will be checking submit data as string. For the author, I'll pick the employee name, and for description I'll pick the purpose. So what you select here is entirely up to you. There's nothing, there are no limitations here other than just make sure to select submit data string. Once we submit our first few documents, you'll see where these come in, where these come in handy. Allow overwrite is a pretty obscure parameter that it's used in some very difficult scenarios that we're not going to get into during training, so I'll just ignore it for now. So that's my data connection. It's just a few screens here in the data connection wizard. I will rename it to something a little bit more useful. And I will just click finish. So there's my data connection. And now I just have to make sure that my submit button is set up correctly. So it looks like it has it's allowing users to submit, and it's sending data to the web service DBXL submit. And then we're going to show this message when the submission fails, and we'll show this message when the submission works. And after submit, we'll just close the form. So that's pretty straightforward. This is out of the box info path. Okay, so that's really it. It's pretty simple to add the data connection to submit to DBXL if you're designing a new form. Right? If you have a form that already exists, that's already been submitting to a specific location, then this becomes less obvious or a little bit more difficult. But this is a new form. without any data connections, so it's pretty straightforward. So I will save this form. And I'm going to save it as an InfoPath 2010 form because I'm going to be showing the integrated scenario on SharePoint 2010. So I just want to make those match. So I'll just give it a very obvious name here. So my form is ready. I can come back to the DBXL admin tool, which we had opened earlier. And I'm going to create a new configuration. New configuration, you can also call that a new document type. And a document type is really the InfoPath form that you see right here. I've attached the InfoPath form that we just worked on. And but the DBXL document type is much more because you can have these other tabs attached to your document type. So you can think of your document type as it's my form plus all the configurations that come along with it. If you wanted to enter a description, you can do that. And since, just in case we are all working on the same server, I'm just gonna put my name here on the document type name just to make sure that that we don't end up with a lot of forms, a lot of the document types named similarly. So I encourage you to do that too if you're following along on our server. If you're on your own server, then that's fine. You're not sharing that space with anyone else. So that's the minimum amount of information that we need, just the name and the XSN form. So I'll save that just to make sure that that's working. So you get a confirmation dialog. Your changes have been saved. Now, the next step is really the key into why we call this the integrated scenario. So I want to pause and make sure that there are no questions. And I'm looking at, there's nothing in chat. Looks like nobody new has joined us so far. And I don't see any questions so far. So I will keep going, but I will come back if there are any questions. So why do we call it the integrated scenario? And this is really the key to the scenario is, if we look at the footer of the DBXL admin tool, we see the web service URL right here. So DBXL is installed on training.formsboard.com, right? If we go to that URL in Internet Explorer, we end up here. We end up in our SharePoint site, SharePoint 2010 site. So what we have done is, you can see it right here, training.formsboard.com, and here, training.formsboard.com. So what we have done is we have installed DBXL on the same server as SharePoint. And in fact, if we go into the server itself, we can take a closer look here. I apologize ahead of time. There are a lot of servers running here, a lot of sites. So I will find the correct one. So this is the training.formsboard.com, and it's, you see the 443 here at the end. It's HTTPS. And here's the Qdabra web service. So the DBXL web service gets installed into the SharePoint site. That's why we call it integrated. And what's more, if we go into the application pools, and this is getting really in-depth here. If we go into the application pools and find our training site, well, this is our app pool for the training site. You'll see that it's running 3 applications right here. So if we go to the SharePoint site root and we go into its basic settings, you'll see that it is using that app pool. And then if we select the Qdabra web service, its basic settings will also tell us that it's using the app pool. So in this scenario, we're using the same application pool for both the SharePoint site and the Qdabra web service. Another option is that you have different application pools, but they're using the same identity. But the bottom line is that DBXL is installed on the same server as SharePoint 2010. That's really the key here. So that means that if we want to integrate DBXL with our SharePoint site right here, all we have to do is come to the SharePoint tab, insert a mapping, and put in that URL. Now we also need a name. I'll just put my name here at the end, again, just to not confuse it with anyone else's library. And we check these 2 checkboxes. Publish library and XSN means DBXL is going to take this form, create the form library, because it doesn't exist. I can show you that it doesn't exist. If we go to all site contents, there are no libraries here. So DBXL is going to go out there, create the form library, publish that XSN, and it's going to set it so that it uses the browser, so InfoPath Form Services. If you get to this step and you save and you get an error, it typically, well, it can mean a number of things. But the first thing to check are the server settings, just to make sure that DBXL is installed on the SharePoint site, to make sure that the application pool for DBXL and the application pool for SharePoint are using the same identity. And if everything looks good there, then you might want to look at the form, make sure the form is browser enabled, browser compatible. For example, if I had saved the form as 2007 or better yet 2013, I would have probably received an error here because it's not the same version as SharePoint. So that's it. Now if I refresh my site contents, you're going to see that new form library has been created. And I can click Add Document. This is going to open the form in the browser. And I can fill it out. I'm just filling in the bare minimum here. So I'll just add a couple of items here just to have some data in the system. Okay. So the form gets submitted. It shows up in our form library. And if we switch to the DBXL admin tool now, you can check the Documents tab. And there's the document. And you'll remember when we set up the data connection to submit, we specified a name, an author, and a description. So this is where those are showing up. So in the future, if somebody tells you there's something wrong with expense code 123456, you can come to this page and you can see it. You can see where that is, right? Obviously, you have the SharePoint form library to sort and filter your view and all that, but DBXL will let you will give you that visual clue here: name, author, and description, so you can find your documents. So I have a question, so I'm going to pause for this question. Where does the actual data reside? Okay. Going back to the model that we had here, let me bring that up again. And I bring this up because it's the best way to visualize this. The info path form that we just created is submitting to DBXL. And so DBXL is the central, the gatekeeper, the central repository for your XML data. And all that DBXL is doing is DBXL is pushing that data into SharePoint according to this mapping that you set up. If this mapping wasn't there, DBXL will still have the data, even though it's not getting mapped to SQL with SharePoint. And the same thing can be said here. I don't have a database mapping, so this data is not in SQL right now, but DBXL has it. This data is in the internal databases that DBXL uses, but those are typically not, you're not opening those up to users, you're not opening those up to other processes that may need to consume the data, like reporting. You wouldn't open up the internal DBXL databases to that. So you can get rid of your database mapping, you can get rid of your SharePoint mapping. The data is still going to be in DBXL. So right now the data is in the SharePoint. Right now the data is here in the SharePoint library, but let me show you this. I'm going to delete this. And I'm going to get rid of this. So right now, my document type does not have a database mapping and does not have a SharePoint mapping. I can still use the form though. I can still open the form, and it's trying to open. It's not going to render in the browser because I'm opening it from the DBXL admin tool. But I can submit this from the client, from the InfoPath client. And I'll just give this another person name so I don't keep repeating myself. So that form that I just submitted, I submitted it from InfoPath into DBXL. And you can see that it's right here in the Documents tab, right? But I don't have a SharePoint mapping set up, so there's nothing in my SharePoint form library. My SharePoint form library is empty right now. So the way to think of this is the data is in DBXL. That's number one. What happens to the data after it makes it into DBXL, that's up to you. So if you send it to SQL, that's up to you. If you send it to SharePoint, that's up to you. So that's the integrated scenario. Is DBXL is the gatekeeper, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add the SharePoint mapping back. And now that it's saved, I'll come back to the Documents tab. So I still have my two documents. I still have nothing in my SharePoint form library, but I can click on Reshred All. Reshred All is an operation that's going to push the DBXL data out, depending on how you've configured it. So if you have configured a database mapping, refresh all is going to send that data to SQL, make sure everything's in sync. If you have configured a SharePoint mapping, clicking refresh all is going to map that data to SharePoint. So refresh all it's doing, it's taking the data in DBXL and just pushing it out. So I'm going to do that for these two documents and come back to the SharePoint form library to show you that the two documents are now available here. So Greg, your question is interesting because it's going to lead me perfectly into the next topic. I know you have to leave in a couple of minutes, but the next topic is conditional mapping. So I will. So the conditional mapping means that you can determine which forms get mapped and which forms don't get mapped to SharePoint. I will add that in a moment here, but we have another question. Can we open an existing XML in DAT and update data? Yes. If you need to open a form here, for example, I'll just open this one. And I will, let's see, what's something that I can change here? Department support. So I'll just add a department. Oh, I need to let InfoPath get its update here, sorry. Okay. So the form was submitted successfully. If we look at the DBXL admin tool, you'll see that there's a version number next to each of these. I just resubmitted this one, so the version number is going to go up to 2. Or 3. I guess I missed it. The reshred must have done something here. And then if I open the form here, it has that data that I just submitted. I opened the form from DAT, changed the data, submit it, and here's the department. So yes, you can open the form, existing form in DAT and update the data and submit it. Now, what if we have hundreds of documents in DBXL and I know only the name of the XML? I know we can search using the doc or ref ID. Yes. Let me see if I can. Let me see if I have anything in my library settings here. No, I don't. 3, that's one of the good questions that maybe we address as a separate little design step on Thursday. Yeah, so how do you search for an XML by name? Yeah, so that's, let me label that here. I don't have a way of flagging a question, but how can I copy it? Well, what I'll do is I'll delete the questions that I have answered, and I will leave your question here to the end, just to remind myself of, since that's a topic we can cover later on. And Michael is asking, mapping to SharePoint via the DAT from the form maps all branches fields, not node mapping required. That's correct. It pushes the entire XML form. So if you go here and you download a copy of the XML form, and you come here and you Let's see if I get the save, and you save. Those two are identical. So that's really the key here is DBXL is keeping those in sync. So DBXL is the web service is doing the hard work for you. If we were to talk about a scenario like side-by-side, then if you get into that scenario, you'll see that the heavy lifting is done in the form itself. The form has to be smart enough to keep all the versions in sync, to make sure that the mapping to submitting to SharePoint and submitting to DAT is happening in a logical order in the form, etc. So DBXL is doing the heavy lifting for you in this scenario. Okay. Now, the next, the final thing I want to show here is the SharePoint mapping can be conditioned. So in order to come up with a condition here, I want to go back to the form, and I want to think about what we have here. We have an expense code, we have a start date, an end date, a business purpose. We have all these fields. Let's say that you want to base this on department. So I'll copy this XPath to the department node because I'm going to use this right here. And I'm going to say that I only want to map the forms where the department is equal to support. And I'm going to create a second one here. And I'm going to have the opposite expression. So anything that's support goes into this form library. Anything that's not support goes into this other form library. So this is a pretty straightforward condition, right? It's all forms are either going to go in here or here. Obviously, you can make this more complex if you needed to, but we'll just illustrate this this example for now. And this is going to take a moment to save because it is creating a new form library. If we come here to all site content, that should be there now. Yep. Okay. So now I have my two form libraries, and my documents are still out of sync because these two were previously submitted to that form library. So what I can do is I can come to the Documents tab. I can click Reshred All. Reshred All is going to reprocess these, make sure that the conditions are applied correctly. So now if I refresh my form library, this form library only has one form because it has support as the department. And then the second form library now has this other form, because the department is blank. It's not equal to support. So my forms are all getting split up into two groups according to that condition that I set up in my SharePoint mapping tab. So that's the power of the SharePoint integrated scenario in SharePoint 2010. There are some additional features here that I will just talk about briefly, and in the meantime, while I'm talking, if you have questions, feel free to type them out. There's a checkbox here for propagate deletes. What this means is that any deletions that happen in one system will be applied in the other system. So by default, in this scenario, if you have a user that goes crazy and deletes the forms in SharePoint, DBXL doesn't delete the forms that have been submitted. So that's the out-of-the-box scenario, is DBXL is not going to delete even if you have a user that goes crazy and deletes everything. If you wanted users to delete, if you wanted to give users the ability to delete, the permission to delete, then there's a server config step that needs to be done, but then also we have to check this checkbox just to allow users that permission. We don't cover that because it's typically something you can control through form library permissions. You'll just disable, you'll just prevent users from deleting. Async is an option that doesn't get used a lot, but it's there in case it's ever needed, and it's meant more for really large forms. I'm talking forms that are, megabytes large, and you don't want to have the users sitting there waiting for data to be mapped. So what this means is, they click submit, form library, the data connection executes immediately, and that kicks off an asynchronous process to map that form into SharePoint. But like I said, your form has to be really large for that to be needed. It's not very common. The content type option is a little bit more common, and that's needed when you have, when you're using content types in your SharePoint site. Let's say that you have a very tight control of form versions. You might need to go to content types. Or if you have the same form deployed throughout the site, you might need to use content types. We have documentation on our website if you need to go down that path. Finally, the object model method is going to work most of the time. Web service can be used if you run into issues with the object model, but if you ever run into issues with the object model, let us know, and we'll try to troubleshoot it with you. It usually works, usually pretty reliable, and the web service is just there as an alternative if all else fails. And then finally, there's a section here at the bottom that says no promoted properties have been defined. That can be corrected, fairly simple. In your info path form, you can promote some fields right here. So let's say I want to promote the employee name and the expense code and the purpose. I might have to rename this to make it more meaningful. So once I save that, I come back to DBXL and I reattach it here, save. That's going to push out the updated template into the server and into SharePoint because of our SharePoint mapping. So there's no extra step for you to publish the form to SharePoint. DBXL is doing that for you. So here's our confirmation. If we go back to the SharePoint tab, you'll see that our promoted properties are now showing up here. And if we go to our form libraries, we should get those columns added here on the right: employee name, expense code, and purpose. And I think if I just reshred, that data is going to get populated. So let's try that. There it is. So the reshred all makes sure that those new promoted properties get the correct data populated into them. So that's the integrated scenario. Now, as I've said in other subjects throughout our day here, we have other possibilities, other scenarios, other variations. I'm just showing the most common features, the most powerful features. But if you have any questions on what you've seen, let me know. If not during the training, then you can contact us in the future and ask about your scenario. So this wraps up the Module 1 for the integrated scenario on SharePoint 2010. So this is Module 2 of Qdabra's DBXL training. The goal of this module is to show you the event receiver scenario, which is the default scenario for SharePoint 2013 installations of DBXL. Although it can also be used for SharePoint 2010 if you would like. Contrary to the integrated scenario, DBXL is not the gatekeeper, the main repository of the data. In the event receiver scenario, your form is going to submit to the SharePoint form library directly. The event receiver is just a WSP file that gets deployed on your SharePoint server. We're going to do that in a minute. And that event receiver listens in on your SharePoint server and then sends that data into the DBXL server. And then in DBXL, if you have a database mapping set up, then DBXL will take care of that DBXL to SQL mapping. So let me take this out of the way, and I'm going to close these. I'm going to close this SharePoint 2010 site, and I'll open up our SharePoint 2013 site. So this is our SharePoint 2013 site. If I go to the site content, you'll see that there's nothing here so far. So we're starting off with a clean slate here. Obviously, as we showed in the slide, the first thing we need a form library, right? We need a form that submits to a form library. That's really the first step in all of this. So let me add a form library that we can use. And like in the previous model, I'll put my name here at the end just to make sure that it's distinguished from anything else that you might want to create on this site. And we have this form that we have worked with in Module 1. If you recall, it has a data connection that submits to DBXL document service. I don't want to use that because our form is not going to submit to the DBXL document service. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with the original form. I'm going to bring back the original form up. So this one, if you check the data connections, you'll see that it has the main submitted email data connection that's available out of the box. So I'll remove that. And what we really need here is just a data connection that submits to the form library. So this is just out of the box, submit data connection to a document library on a SharePoint site. And we need that URL of the library that we just created. So here's the URL. And we need a file name, so I'll just pick one of the fields for now. This might change as we design our form later on, but this is fine for now. And that's it. There's nothing else to configure here. I've been getting a lot of authentication challenges on this server, so if you get some, I'm experiencing the same thing, but the credentials appear to be working okay. So that's all we need. We just have a regular SharePoint form library submit. Again, we'll make sure that our form is using this correctly. It should have picked it up automatically, but we'll just double check. So it is allowing users to submit the form to a SharePoint document library using the data connection that we just created. And we have a failure and a success message. And after the submission, we close the form. So everything's pretty much set up the same way as previous, except that we're not submitting directly to DBXL. We're submitting to the form library. So I will save this. I'll call this expense report 2013, and I'll need to change the data type here. Okay. So that's it. We don't need to do anything else to the form at the moment. Obviously, we will need to publish it to that form library. And again, this is just a regular out-of-the-box InfoPath publishing wizard. So we are enabling this form to be filled out by a browser. We're publishing to a form library, and we're going to update that form library that I created a few minutes ago. I can add some columns here, so maybe I should. Let's promote the report date, and let's promote the purpose. Should be good enough, just to get some data in there, and I'll just let InfoPath publish that. Let's take a moment. So again, I keep getting these credential challenges, but I did get a failure here. So let me just quickly check why the publish would fail. Okay, let's try that again. Let me make sure that I've added this as a local intranet site. I think I did before we started. Maybe not. Okay, I apologize for this. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. I'm trying this again. I keep getting credential prompts for some reason. Okay, well, let's check whether I have permissions to publish. Okay, something's going on here. Yeah, something's going on here. It's completely rejecting me now. Okay, so I should have permissions. It's a little odd. So Sri, your question, why not try on SharePoint 2010? I just have the server set up in such a way that SharePoint 2013 is on a separate server. So I have SharePoint 2013 on one server, and I have DBXL on a separate server, and that DBXL server happens to be the same one as SharePoint 2010. So I'm just trying to get the scenario here to do the hop between one server and the other. it's gonna fail again. It's not showing up on the screen that I'm sharing, but I'm getting just a ton of credential prompts. This is really unexplainable. Alright, so let's see what we can do here. Let me share this out. Maybe this will fix it. So, I haven't run into this before, but it is a new server, so maybe there's some issue here. If anybody needs this this article, I can share the link with you. It's a Microsoft support article that I'm following here. So let's see. This works. Okay. Let's try that again. I'll put the URL to the article in our chat window. Well, it's not letting me. Here we go. So I sent the article to the entire audience in chat, but I am still getting credential prompts. So it's possible that this didn't resolve it. Alright. So that didn't work. But that's not gonna help me. Yeah. I don't want to bore you looking that up. Alright, let's try one more time here. Okay, well at this point, let's see, where's my site? So it is creating the form library, but it's not publishing it.